I am the early departed crazy first love of Joshua. After my death, a group of women who called themselves players started flocking to him. They were stubborn in believing that Joshua must find a replacement. However, as expected, they all failed. When I saw the 99th player fail their mission, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. Then, the angry system pulled my soul out and stuffed it into a completely unfamiliar body, making me become a player sent to capture Joshua. The emotionless mechanical voice at this moment sounded rather malicious. Come on, take a guess. Do you think Joshua will still recognize you like this? Chapter 1. I was out of breath when I finally arrived at the KTV, where a girl in a white dress was leaning beside Joshua, smiling at me with ill intentions. Why are you so late? Then you'll have to sing a song to apologize to me, she said. Joshua stretched his arms, resting his legs on the leather sofa, looking at me with cold indifference and even a hint of mockery. Seeing Joshua's familiar face again made me freeze for a moment. In my mind, the system's voice echoed, "Host, your target's affection level is currently 6%. If it drops to 4%, you'll be completely lost. Please don't waste this opportunity to be reborn." Hearing this, I immediately lost my focus, silently cursing the system for its petty revenge. But when I tried to speak, I suddenly felt an excruciating pain in my throat. The sound that came out was just a hoarse, broken jumble of syllables. The girl beside Joshua in the white dress, the one who caused the pain in my throat, Freya, looked at my awkward state with a gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. But she deliberately put on a pitiful act, feigning innocence as she said in a delicate tone, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know Lara's throat was damaged. I wasn't doing it on purpose. You're not mad at me, right, sister?" I didn't respond, just turned my gaze toward Joshua. The man sitting on the sofa exuded a noble and aloof aura, like snow on a pine tree or the moon in the clouds. I wanted to ask him, after all this time, how did he end up like this? However, Joshua merely glanced at me indifferently, his lips slightly parted as he coldly uttered a single word. Sing. Chapter 2. Having watched so many players fail from an omniscient perspective, I was very clear about Joshua's attitude toward these outsiders. No matter how submissive and flattering the players were, no matter how obedient they were to him, Joshua would only view their actions as part of their mission to capture him, and their affection for him would plummet. In other words, I couldn't act like a good girl now. However, if I rejected him, that wouldn't work either. Joshua's affection for me would still plummet. It was a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. And to make things worse, the system placed an additional restriction on me. I couldn't reveal my true identity to Joshua in any way, even though I wanted to rush up to him and ruffle his hair, cursing at him, "You little brat! Who taught you that ridiculous sitting posture?" But I couldn't do that. I could only stand there, looking at him. I couldn't even cry. I was only 2% away from being completely lost. And at this point, it seemed like every choice would lead to failure. With this situation, the system either had too little tolerance or simply enjoyed watching me destroy the person I loved with my own hands, constantly urging me to take action. Its tone even seemed to carry a hint of expectation. But a smile curved at the corner of my lips. Today, you will find out why the madman's first love was a madman's first love. Chapter 3. Seeing that I hadn't spoken, the look of triumph in Freya's eyes deepened as she played up her role as the vicious villainess. She once again spoke in a syrupy voice to Joshua. "Phoo, why don't we just forget it? Look at Lara's throat. How is she going to sing? Aren't you just making her embarrass herself? If this goes on, Lara might get upset. Oh, I forgot to mention, this is a world from a book. Freya is the villainess, and Joshua is the male lead. But I'm not the female lead. As Joshua's first love who died young, I'm just a background character meant to deepen the relationship between the male and female leads. In the original story, after I died, a kind and gentle girl who resembled me by 7 points would appear beside the heartbroken Joshua. She would rescue him, change him, and after experiencing many misunderstandings and hardships, they would end up together happily. That was the original plot. But recently, it seemed Joshua had awakened. He began to reject the original female lead's attempts to get close to him, even trying to forcefully change the ending where he ended up with her. This caused a dramatic upheaval in the book's world. So, To prevent the world from collapsing, the system sent in more players, each taking over the original female lead's body to try and capture Joshua and bring the plot back on track. But Joshua, like someone who had taken the wrong medicine, remained unmoved no matter what methods these players used. The system had no choice but to keep Joshua in an endless loop, repeatedly sending players to fix the original storyline. However, what made things worse was that somewhere along the line, one of the foolish players let slip the truth. Joshua learned that they were just outside players. From then on, Joshua became even more indifferent, coldly watching as one after another, these players marched to their doom. Chapter 4. After I died in the original story, I didn't know why my soul didn't dissipate. My consciousness was trapped in an omniscient perspective, silently watching this farce unfold. When I saw Joshua go through his 99th cycle and the system still couldn't win his heart, I couldn't help but laugh mockingly. Then, in a fit of shame and anger, the system kicked me into the original book world. Of course, it used the body of the original female lead, one that had already been ravaged by the previous players. I did ask the system once, other players get rewards when they succeed. So what will I get if I succeed? The system dodged the question, saying, you don't need to know what the reward is, but you should have a clear idea of what the punishment is. I believe, just for the fact that if you fail, you'll be electrocuted for 3 days and 3 nights. You'll make an effort to complete the task. By the way, the emotionless mechanical voice dragged on the last syllable, as if teasing, this body belongs to someone else, but the soul is yours. If Joshua falls in love with you, does that mean he's falling for someone else? Well, that was quite a philosophical question, but I didn't have time to think about it. Joshua's voice, as cold as an autumn wind, interrupted my inappropriate thoughts. If you're not going to sing, get out. I looked up at him. The peach blossom eyes that once held so much tenderness now were filled with frost, with a hint of mockery hidden within. I sighed. You're the one who told me to sing, you little brat. Chapter 5. So, under Freya's expectant and mocking gaze, I took the microphone and, with a plop, knelt in front of Joshua. Joshua was stunned for a moment, then a flicker of impatience crossed his eyes. He probably thought I was going to beg for mercy. Meanwhile, the system's voice echoed in my mind, a bit smug and triumphant, warning, warning, detecting a continuous decline in the target's affection, 5.8%, 5.6%, 5.4%. Host is about to die. Host is about to die. Please immediately restore the target's affection. Immediately restore the target's affection. Freya also pretended to be surprised, covering her mouth, just about to continue her mockery, when I let out a loud, desperate cry that stunned her into silence. I knelt on the ground, pounding the floor with my hands, wiping my face as I shouted, my voice hoarse and strained. Why can't you understand? I love you so deeply. I love no one but you. The scene, with my tragic expression and voice sounding like a broken gong, resembled more of a mournful dirge than a song. Joshua's lackeys were panicking, rushing to stop me. The more they tried to pull me away, the worse it looked. I struggled in their grasp, still continuing my wailing performance. Nobody but you, in this life and the next. We'll never part. Joshua's face darkened because I was singing directly to him, but the system's warning ceased. I checked Joshua's affection level, and it had halted at 5.2%. You see, I told you, abstract actions can save lives. Chapter 6. After my dramatic, funeral-style performance, even the system fell silent. It was probably wondering why such a person was Joshua's unforgettable first love, the one who made him keep his heart pure. Joshua's face, once as cold as ice, was now as dark as the bottom of a pot. He glared at me, still unaware that his so-called noble and aloof demeanor had been easily manipulated by me, stirring emotions he didn't even realize he had. Freya, who had been stunned at first, quickly regained her composure and nervously tried to smooth things over. Didn't expect Lara to still have a sense of humor. Freya's attempt at deflecting almost succeeded in bringing Joshua back to his usual self. He quickly resumed his cold, indifferent expression, staring at me as he spoke. You came here just for this? Of course not. I shook my head and pointed a finger at him. Wait a second. Freya, puzzled, asked. Wait for what? I responded without answering. 3. Freya, wait for 3 minutes? I raised an eyebrow and smirked. 2. 1. As soon as I finished, both Joshua and Freya's expressions changed, and they both clutched their chests, spitting out a mouthful of blood simultaneously. I nodded in satisfaction. Ah, right. I was waiting for the plot to unfold. Chapter 7. Every player has to follow the plot, and I'm no exception. Now, this plot point happened to align with the original female lead's visit to KTV to celebrate Freya's birthday. It was a sudden event. Someone had poisoned Joshua's drink, intending only to harm him. But Joshua, in an unexpected twist, poured a cup for Freya as well. As a result, both of them were poisoned. However, since Joshua was the male lead, he couldn't die. So, in the room, aside from the assassin, there was also Joshua's personal doctor, and this doctor happened to have the antidote. But there was only enough for one person. At that moment, having lost me, his mad first love, Joshua was intent on dying and insisted on giving the antidote to Freya. Meanwhile, the original female lead, deeply in love with Joshua, forced him to take the only antidote, resulting in Freya's death. From then on, Joshua held even more resentment toward the original female lead, and their love-hate relationship began. The first half of the original book had many characters criticizing the original female lead for this action. But honestly, what else could she do? If you could only save one person, who would you choose? No matter who you saved, you'd be morally judged in the end. And now, I faced the same choice. Joshua already disliked these outsiders, and after experiencing 99 cycles, he had gone through this plot many times. I had no doubt that if I chose to save him and not Freya, his affection for me would instantly drop to 0 before I could even try to remedy it. But if I saved Freya, Joshua would die, and the world would collapse, erasing me in the process. Another dead-end situation. Chapter 8. Back in the KTV. Seeing Joshua spitting blood, the entire room had descended into chaos. Joshua's doctor rushed over to diagnose the situation and quickly prepared the antidote. Joshua, who had gone through 99 cycles, appeared pale but remained remarkably calm. Lying on the sofa, he looked at me, offering a faint, cold smile. I know you're a player. I know you want to save me, but you're still going to die. Many players who had heard him say this in the past had turned as white as ghosts, yet still hesitated and chose to save him. Joshua enjoyed watching them squirm, yet he still longed for his own death. But I remained calm, picking up the antidote the doctor had prepared, splitting it in half, and smiling brightly at Joshua. Perhaps you've heard of the rectal administration method? What? Joshua froze for a second. The doctor, who had been frowning, suddenly looked at me with surprise and excitement, shouting, "Yes, rectal administration. This way. The antidote will be enough." I smiled sweetly at the now wary Joshua and explained, "The rectal administration method, as the name implies, involves administering the medicine into the rectum where the intestinal wall absorbs it. Since the absorption is much more thorough, it's twice as effective as taking it orally. So, when the dose is insufficient, this method is used to achieve the same effect." With each word I spoke, Joshua's already unpleasant expression grew darker. By the time I finished, his face was a complex mix of emotions. He gritted his teeth and spat out, "Let me die." I smiled. Not happening. Chapter 9. And so, a strange scene unfolded in the KTV booth. I reached for Joshua's belt, while he, fighting through the pain, gritted his teeth and desperately tried to stop me. His pale face now flushed with embarrassment and pain. All of his lackeys had been dismissed, leaving only Joshua's personal doctor standing helplessly by. After all, Joshua was poisoned, and he couldn't resist me for long. As I began to undo his belt, he couldn't hold back any longer and, coughing up blood, urgently shouted at the doctor, "Cough, what are you doing? Cough, cough, why aren't you stopping this woman? Oh, what a noble and chaste husband." I continued struggling to remove Joshua's pants, turning to the doctor with a sly grin. "Doctor, you wouldn't want people to know that Joshua had a problem under your watch, right?" The doctor nodded frantically. Meanwhile, Freya, lying nearby, watched helplessly as the doctor grabbed Joshua's arms, while I proceeded to remove his pants. I'm going to kill you both. I'll kill you. The heir of the wealthy family, who had once ruled over everything, was now helplessly weeping as he struggled beneath me, unable to do anything but rage. A few minutes later, I removed my sterile gloves, replaced them with a fresh pair, and turned to Freya with a smile. Your turn, Miss Freya. Chapter 10. After all, Freya is a girl, so I teamed up with the doctor to drag her into the bathroom. Once the doctor left, I proceeded with the rectal medication method. As more of the fox friends and dog pals arrived, they could hear Freya's weak sobs from inside the bathroom. No, no, please, Laura, please don't. Ah. A few minutes later, I walked out of the bathroom, removing my sterile gloves, while Freya's collapse of sobs echoed from within. The fox and dog friends looked at Joshua, who lay on the sofa with his eyes tightly shut, still dazed but with red rims around his eyes. Then, they looked toward the bathroom, their eyes filled with shock and confusion. At this point, the system weakly spoke in my mind. Host. According to the original plot, Freya is supposed to die here. By disrupting the plot like this, it could cause the world of the book to collapse. I didn't care. Then tell me, does it seem like the world of the book is collapsing? The system hesitated for a moment and replied, it doesn't seem like it. I nodded. Exactly. She's alive now, but it's pretty much the same as if she were dead. When people ask how she and Joshua were both saved at the same time with only one antidote left, what is she going to say? The system fell silent. I laughed. Chapter 11. Joshua furrowed his brows, as if he had just awoken from a long dream. He repeatedly went through the same cycle, facing all sorts of strategists throwing sweet traps and even forced advances at him. Time and time again, he told them, I like Freya. I don't like Laura, and I don't want a substitute for Freya. But it was as if they couldn't hear him. Almost crazed, they continued to throw every means at him, one after another. He was drugged, but he would rather bite his own fingers until they bled than touch the woman in front of him. He didn't understand why they insisted on forcing him to love them. Why was it not allowed for him to simply spend the rest of his life remembering someone? They cried in front of him, their faces tear-streaked. I know this is shameless. I know it's disgraceful. But what else can I do? If I don't succeed in capturing your heart, I'll die. Hearing these words, Joshua suddenly smiled. Then go ahead and die. If loving him was the only thing that kept them alive, then if such an absurd thing were true, then go die. In a flash, Joshua felt something cold dripping onto his face. Freya. Joshua murmured her name and slowly opened his eyes. Then, he saw my big face, as I was biting into a pear while leaning close to observe him. The liquid on his face was just pear juice. Joshua despaired and closed his eyes again. Why am I still not dead? Chapter 12. Joshua's private doctor was very grateful for my bold actions and reported my deeds to the Fu family. Freya's family and the Fu family had always been close, and to thank me for saving both Joshua and Freya, the Fu family specially hosted a banquet for me. According to the original plot, Fu's matriarch was very fond of the original female protagonist and wanted to use this opportunity to arrange a marriage between the original heroine and Joshua. I sat at the banquet, and Fu's matriarch smiled as she gently stroked my hand, asking, I heard from the doctor that the situation was urgent at the time, and there was only one antidote. Laura, how did you manage to save both Joshua and Freya at the same time? Before I could answer, Joshua darkened his face and cut her off. Grandma, it seems my mother and the others have something to say. Fu's matriarch glanced at Fu's wife and immediately frowned, coldly speaking, well, I also have something to say, so let's all speak at once. Fu's wife awkwardly smiled and lowered her head. Mom, please go ahead. In the original plot, while Fu's matriarch liked the original heroine, the entire Fu family, including Joshua, disliked her. Fu's matriarch was aware of their disapproval, so she treated Fu's wife with a much colder attitude. Fu's matriarch snorted and said, If you ask me, I think Laura is a good girl. She saved Joshua's life, and today I want to take charge and arrange a marriage between her and Joshua. Chapter 13. These words immediately silenced the entire room. I, too, was covered in cold sweat. From my past observations of those strategists, most of them died in the KTV scene, and even the few who made it this far all met their end here. No strategist had ever made it past this point, no matter how smart or scheming they were. As soon as they reached this part of the plot, Joshua's favorability toward them would drop drastically to 4% or even to 0. No one knew why, but this was the death sentence for all strategists. I secretly glanced at Joshua, only to see him with a dark expression, slowly speaking, "Grandma, I can't do this. It would be unfair to Freya." Fu's matriarch merely glanced at him and sighed. "Freya is a good child. But Joshua, you can't keep living in the past." "I'm not living in the past. I'm living for her." Joshua, rarely interrupting Fu's matriarch, stared at her with an unwavering gaze. His lips pressed into a thin line. "You like Laura? Fine. You can treat her as a goddaughter. She saved my life, and the Fu family will repay her for it. But for the rest of my life, I only want to be with Freya. Why do you all want to stop me? Why can't I just quietly remember someone?" In a family where etiquette was highly valued, Joshua shouting at his elder was considered an extreme disrespect. But Fu's matriarch didn't show much displeasure. She simply sighed deeply, her tone firm and unquestionable. "This matter is non-negotiable." "Is that so?" Joshua sneered, his face ashen. "But what if I just refuse?" Chapter 14. Watching this standoff between grandmother and grandson, I nervously asked the system. "System, what's Joshua's current favorability toward me?" The system responded. "The current favorability of the target toward the host is 5.2%. I was surprised. A miracle. All the other strategists would have been dead by now. But here I am, still alive? Now, even I began to wonder why this was happening. Before I could think further, I suddenly heard a crisp voice from a little girl. "Grandma." I looked up and saw a little girl, about 7 or 8 years old, rushing into Fu's matriarch's arms, smiling sweetly at her. In an instant, Fu's matriarch's expression softened, and Joshua diverted his gaze elsewhere. The little girl's appearance instantly diffused the tense atmosphere in the living room. The little girl blinked her big eyes and looked at me, her sweet voice asking Fu's matriarch, "I heard this sister is very smart. Eva wants to test her. If she answers Eva's question correctly, Eva will admit she's her cousin's fiancé." Fu's matriarch didn't even think for a moment before nodding and smiling. "Sure, Eva. What question do you want to ask Laura?" In the original plot, this little girl was the daughter of Joshua's uncle, born late in life. Not only were her parents doting on her, but Fu's matriarch also spoiled her immensely, almost to the point of granting her every wish. Fu's wife knew this, so she deliberately had the little girl pose a challenge to the heroine at Joshua and her engagement banquet. Fu's matriarch obviously didn't expect a little girl to come up with any difficult questions, and since the girl had no authority to make decisions, she smiled and agreed. The little girl tilted her head, a mischievous smile on her face. She took a pinch of salt from her pocket, sprinkled it on the table, then tossed in a piece of white sugar and stirred them together. She mischievously looked at me and asked, "Can you separate the sugar that Eva just threw into this pile of salt?" Chapter 15. I raised an eyebrow. "Little brat, you brought your schoolwork here, hoping that your sister would do it for you. Huh?" Grandma Fu paused for a moment upon hearing this, then smiled and patted the little girl on the head, gently scolding her. "Eva, don't be silly. How long is this going to take? Don't make trouble for Laura, okay?" Indeed, in the original plot, the female protagonist spent a full 5 hours looking for the sugar in response to the little girl's teasing, using a magnifying glass to check each grain. Although her method was clumsy, the way she seriously dealt with the child's unreasonable behavior won her great favor from the little girl, which later laid a solid foundation for her marriage into the Fu family. As for me, I just glanced at the little brat before turning around and walking out. Everyone present assumed I had given up. Mrs. Fu visibly sighed in relief, while the little girl loudly shouted, "Laura didn't make trouble. This can totally be split up. Sister is not smart enough to know how. I don't acknowledge her as Fu Gij's bride." Grandma Fu's face darkened, and for the first time, she scolded me. "Laura, Come back. The child doesn't understand. Are you going to argue with her? The system was also panicking, shouting in my mind. Host, you need to follow the plot. If you don't, the world of the book will collapse. Joshua silently watched me leave, his expression unreadable, though his favorability toward me remained unchanged. Host, if you don't follow the plot now, I'm going to punish you. The system jumped up and down in my mind, buzzing in my ears. I furrowed my brow and impatiently responded. Who says I'm not following the plot? Do I have to follow the original female protagonist's clumsy method? Chapter 16. Then why did you leave the venue? The system, which was preparing to give me a serious punishment, paused upon hearing my words, calling for backup. I rolled my eyes inwardly at the system and walked outside to the flower bed, casually rummaging around for a while. After a few moments, I held something in my hand and returned to the venue. Mrs. Fu, who had been secretly rejoicing thinking I'd left, was surprised to see me return. Grandma Fu, though her face wasn't very pleasant, still smiled warmly and gestured for me to sit down. I walked straight to the table, turned to the little girl, and said, "Little brat, watch carefully, and don't come up with such simple and childish tests again." Ignoring Grandma Fu's darkened expression, I took a knife and divided the pile of salt on the table into 10 small portions. Then, I placed the thing I had been holding in my hand on the table. At that moment, everyone saw it was an ant. The rich child quickly understood what I was doing as soon as I released the ant. She stopped her commotion and stared at me in a daze. It's kind of boring to lower the dimension to deal with a little brat. But if she's the one who provokes you, then it's quite satisfying. The ant, as expected, accurately picked out the 1 grain of sugar from the 10 piles of salt. What took the original female protagonist 5 hours to solve, I completed in just 5 minutes. No wonder I secretly laughed at her for being so naive, after all. If she weren't naive, she wouldn't have spent so long chasing after someone who didn't like her. Playing the role of a simp. Chapter 17. Seeing how easily I solved the little girl's challenge, Mrs. Fu's face turned slightly sour, while Grandma Fu's expression turned from dark to bright. She smiled at me and said, all right. I knew Laura was smart. Don't argue with the child. Let's all sit down and eat peacefully. Even the system in my mind was impressed. Host. I was ready for you to go crazy again. But this time, you didn't. Unbelievable. Truly unbelievable. However, I calmly replied to Grandma Fu. Grandma, I won't eat. I won't accept the engagement. Because... I glanced at Joshua beside me. Mr. Fu doesn't seem to be very willing either. I think I should respect the wishes of the person I'm supposed to be engaged to. I turned back to the little girl and continued. I didn't solve Eva's problem just to get engaged. I did it out of respect for her. Finally, I sighed and said, love can't be forced. I love him, but he is free. With those words, I turned and left the venue. Perfect. The system was ecstatic in my mind. This plot is going so perfectly. Host, you are the only one to complete this plotline, truly deserving of being the male lead's unforgettable first love. That's right. I was following the plot. In the original story, after solving the little girl's challenge, the female protagonist didn't accept the engagement that Grandma Fu arranged for her. Instead, she decisively left the venue, and this moment became the turning point in the plot, triggering Joshua's relentless pursuit. Then the system exclaimed, Host, the affection value of the target is skyrocketing. 5.4%, 10%, 30%, 70%. Oh my god, 100%. Finally, the plot is back on track. Thank you. You're the only one who stopped the world from collapsing. However, I quickened my pace. Even running, the system shouted in my mind. Hey, you don't have to run so fast. There's always a taxi by the door. As I ran, I heard rapid, heavy footsteps behind me. Then, I was swept up into a warm embrace. Chapter 18. Freya. A trembling voice sounded in my ear. I turned my head to see Joshua's red-eyed face, full of emotion. Freya. He held me tightly, his voice calling my name louder each time. Freya, you came back. Didn't you? I closed my eyes and sighed helplessly. Yes. The moment those words escaped my mouth, I was stunned myself. Didn't the system put a restriction on me, preventing me from actively acknowledging or revealing my identity? Just then, the system shouted excitedly in my mind. Haha, I knew it! I won! Main God! Main God! Get out here! I won! What was that about? Before I could even question the system in my mind, I suddenly felt something was off. The time around us seemed to have stopped. The light rain that had been falling was now frozen in the air, suspended motionlessly. The Fu family members who had been chasing Joshua were also frozen in mid-run, unable to move. It seemed like the only ones who could move were Joshua and me. At that moment, a voice, neither clearly male nor female, echoed from the sky. Can you two explain to me clearly? How did you recognize her? I immediately understood. The voice was the main god the system had been shouting about, and it must have made a bet with the main god about whether Joshua could recognize me. But what was the meaning of this? And what was the bet? Chapter 19. Joshua seemed to adapt to the situation faster than I did. After all, he had gone through the loop of this world 99 times, each time retaining his memories. If someone had told him that a god was manipulating this world, he'd probably find it quite reasonable. If you can't recognize the person you love just because she's in a different body, then you don't deserve to say you love her. Joshua gently turned my face to him, gazing into my eyes with deep affection. The vibrant, flourishing life force in Freya. I would never mistake it. I knew it in the KTV. Only Freya could do something like that, no matter how dire the situation. She'd always find a way to joke with life. Even if she knew heaven was about to sentence her to death, she'd still smile and give heaven the middle finger at the last second. That kind of playful attitude has always had a fatal attraction for me. The system in my mind went wild, nodding furiously. Yes, yes, yes. That's love. No matter what body you're in, I can recognize you instantly. That's true love. But since he recognized you at the KTV, why did he wait until now to say it? And why has his affection level never increased? Joshua seemed to understand the system's confusion and continued. But I didn't dare to admit it. You know, Freya, I knew I was facing a body of an. I knew once the task was complete, you'd go back to your world. I was afraid you'd disappear like that, and I didn't want to lose you again, so I pretended I didn't recognize you, tricking myself into thinking it wasn't you. That way, I could at least spend more time with you. He gave a bitter smile, his gaze filled with complexity. But love can't be hidden. Just now, I truly realized it was you coming back. The real Freya. I couldn't control myself. Joshua's voice faltered as he held me even tighter, tears filling his eyes. Are you going to leave again, Freya? Are you going to leave me again, like last time? Why? Why do you always leave? No. I looked at the growing light on the horizon and the world around me slowly falling apart. I pulled the corner of my mouth into a smile and said, Leave? You wish. This time, it's not just me, but everyone in the world who has to leave. Chapter 20. All of this started because of a bet between the system and the main god. There was a romance novel called Let Me Warm You Up. In the story, the male lead, Joshua, is deeply in love with his first love, Freya, whom he met during his hospital stay when they were both young. While everyone treated Joshua carefully because of his illness, Freya never saw him as a person. The two, both sick, played cards together, but Freya secretly cheated. And when Joshua ended up only wearing his underwear, she revealed the truth. This angered Joshua so much that his heart nearly gave out. After all, Joshua suffered from a congenital heart condition. Through their playful antics, Joshua developed feelings for Freya. Then one day, his family joyfully informed him that a suitable heart had been found for him. After Joshua underwent the surgery, full of hope, he rushed to Freya's hospital room to show off his new heart, only to find that the room was empty. The nurse told him that Freya had passed away. She had signed an organ donation agreement before her condition worsened, and she was such a kind child. Joshua stood frozen in the doorway of the room, clutching his chest where his new heart beat, tasting the bitter sting of loss for the first time in his life. In the years that followed, another girl, Laura, entered Joshua's life. Her presence healed him, and Joshua's feelings for her gradually grew from resistance to genuine affection. until he eventually fell in love with her. He loved her with Freya's heart. Chapter 21. The author, for reasons unknown, spent a great deal of time describing the past between Joshua and Freya, weaving it throughout the tangled relationship between Joshua and Lara. Joshua initially hated Lara because she bore a resemblance to Freya. About 70% of her face looked like Freya's. He would deliberately flaunt her in front of him, only to later treat her as a replacement for Freya and humiliate her. Eventually, though, he fell in love with Lara. It was only when the book was about to conclude that the world in the novel began to crumble. Joshua, for some inexplicable reason, awakened self-awareness and resisted Lara's closeness, fighting against the plot. To fix the broken world, the main god, who managed various small worlds, sent one strategist after another into Lara's body, trying to get the plot back on track, but each attempt failed. Finally, during the 99th selection of a strategist, the system, unable to endure any longer, snapped. "You thick-headed rock, isn't it just first love? Come on, I'll give you your first love. Let's see if you really want it or if you're just pretending." The main god tried to stop it, but the system was furious, and there was nothing the main god could do. In the end, the main god bet with the system that Joshua would recognize Freya's soul inside Lara's body, without me having to reveal my identity. Chapter 22. So, after hearing the system's explanation, I glanced around at the world that was gradually breaking apart and asked the system, "Are you planning to destroy this whole little world along with us?" "Well," the system's voice carried a bit of a playful tone. "Guess." As the system spoke, the surroundings plunged into complete darkness. When I opened my eyes again, I found that Joshua and I were still standing in the same spot. I looked at him, and Joshua's eyes were filled with indescribable surprise. He trembled as he reached up to touch my face and asked, his voice shaking, "Freya?" "Aw," I replied with a single word, but immediately realized something was off. I quickly pulled a mirror from my bag and checked my reflection. It was my face. The mirror reflected not the body of the original heroine, but my original face. The system's voice lazily echoed in my mind. "Sigh. Since you died at 18 in the original book, I could only restore you to the age of 18 now. So, this is..." My mind went blank for a moment. "It's the bet between me and the main god. And your reward," the system replied. "Anyway, this broken world has already collapsed so many times. Why not make a full overhaul this time? At least this way, Joshua won't go crazy again. So, you and the main god's bet is to rebuild this little world according to Joshua's will?" I asked, barely able to believe what I was hearing. Chapter 23. Pretty much, the system said. Once characters in the book awaken self-awareness, it means they have the ability to change the little world around them. Otherwise, why do so many tragic female protagonists escape? Why do we send so many strategists into various small worlds to follow the original plot? It paused for a moment before continuing. "Well, these are all old-fashioned methods. I actually suggested to the main god long ago that instead of constantly fixing the old world's plot, why not just rebuild the whole little world? After all, these are all ancient worlds, and sticking to old methods can never really solve the problem." The main god chimed in. "It's a bet, but it's also the beginning of a revolution. From now on, more and more little worlds won't forcibly bring in strategists to follow the plot but will rebuild according to the actual situation." Exactly. Exactly. The system nodded enthusiastically. After all, once characters in the book awaken self-awareness, even the author can't control their fate, right? If you force characters to follow the plot you've written, all you're doing is twisting the little world. With that, the system completely disappeared from my mind. I stared blankly at Joshua, still unable to fully digest what was happening. Joshua, however, naturally took my hand, squinted his seductive eyes, and smiled meaningfully at me. "By the way, Freya, about that little trick you pulled on me in the hospital, I still haven't had the chance to settle that score with you." "Me? What? Wait, what? Seriously? You still remember that?"